Our story today begins in the heart of Coruscant at the Jedi Temple. Obi-Wan and Anakin are about to meet with the Jedi Council to report the attack on Senator Amidala the night before. As Master and Apprentice stand before the Council, Obi-Wan feels a presence he hasn't felt in 10 years. Train the boy. That was his master, Qui-Gon Jinn, but Obi-Wan knew that couldn't be. He had died on Naboo in front of him, but the words still stuck with him. He had his fears about how he was training Anakin, especially after seeing how obvious his attachment to Padme still was. But he was the chosen one. Qui-Gon had known that, and Obi-Wan believed in his master. Master Windu then told Obi-Wan that he would go after the bounty hunter who escaped the night before. Obi-Wan would then ask what would happen with Senator Amidala and her security, and Master Yoda said that his Padawan would handle that. Obi-Wan felt a chill down his spine as he felt his master's presence again. Train the boy. And in that moment, Obi-Wan knew that he needed to be around Anakin right now. His duty to his master outweighed what the Council may need from him right now. No. The Council froze. Anakin looked to his master, confused and growing angry. He hadn't seen Padme in 10 years, and now that he was being given the opportunity, his master was trying to take it away from him. Windu would tell him that Padme needed to be taken off-world, but that she wouldn't be truly safe until her attacker was captured. And Obi-Wan knew this, but before he could explain, Anakin would speak up. He would inform the Council that Padme would not leave Coruscant because of the Military Creation Act that she was strongly against. Yoda would say that she would have to trust their judgment for now, and Windu would tell Anakin to go to the Chancellor to have him talk to Senator Amidala. Anakin would then leave the Council in a much worse mood than when he came in with his master. Windu would then ask Obi-Wan why he was trying to hold his Padawan back, one who was not only progressing quickly in the eyes of the Council, but was destined to destroy the Sith. Obi-Wan wasn't sure how he could explain this, that his master had spoken to him through the Force and apparently death to warn him against leaving Anakin. But if the Council knew he was lying, then he didn't know what would happen to Anakin. He still had much to learn, and his abilities had made him arrogant, but he was still his Padawan, and while connection was forbidden by the Council, he had grown to care for the boy. A disturbance in the Force there was, Yoda said before Obi-Wan could decide on the answer. Concern your Padawan, you believe it does? Obi-Wan would say yes, that this disturbance in the Force was because he and Anakin shouldn't separate at the moment. He knew that Anakin was skilled and would be able to handle protecting a senator, though he also knew Padme was no ordinary senator to him. But he didn't tell them all that. The Council believed in Anakin after years of thinking he was too old to be a Jedi. He couldn't take that away from him by bringing up his attachment to Padme. Instead, he would say that his Padawan was having visions of his mother dying, that he was unsettled at that. Combined with this disturbance in the Force was why he and Anakin had to stick together. The Council would then deliberate on this, as memories of Anakin's fear of losing his mother were remembered by most of the Council. Windu would volunteer to search for the bounty hunter who killed the Changeling, as Obi-Wan and Anakin would go to Naboo to protect Senator Amidala. While this was happening, Anakin would discuss the plan with Chancellor Palpatine, who would assure the young Padawan that he would make sure that Padme would not resist the Jedi's protection. But he knew there was more. Anakin was clearly unsettled, and Palpatine knew it had to be something the Jedi had done. Anakin would tell him what had happened within the Council chambers, that his master didn't trust him to protect Padme on his own. He caught himself, though. He didn't want to whine in front of the Chancellor. He was grateful that Obi-Wan was his master, to have a master as wise as Master Yoda and powerful as Master Windu. But the Chancellor was understanding of the situation as he flattered Anakin, knowing the Jedi wanted to control his power, that Obi-Wan feared how much more powerful his apprentice was than him. Anakin wouldn't say anything more, but the Chancellor's words stuck with him as he learned that he and Obi-Wan would both be going with Padme to Naboo. While Obi-Wan was ensuring the safety of their transport, Anakin and Padme would vent their frustrations. Hers that she would be missing a key vote on a bill that she campaigned against for a year, and his that his master he knew he was exceeding in many ways, not even trusting him with a mission by himself. Flirting? Romance? Once discussions were completed with Captain Typho, Mace Windu would approach Obi-Wan one last time before he would leave for Naboo. He would tell him that the Jedi archives provided no answers for the dart's origins. Obi-Wan would then suggest he check in on an old friend of his who was a prospector and now owned a diner on Coruscant. That he may know more, but he had a feeling that wasn't all Master Windu came here for. And he was right. Windu wanted to make sure that he still had faith in his Padawan, that the Council still believed that he could be the one to bring balance to the Force. Obi-Wan knew this, though he also knew that his Padawan was becoming arrogant because of his abilities, but Windu's words still moved him. Whatever he felt in the Force, he still needed to trust in his Padawan. The trip to Naboo would go without a hitch, just as it had before, as Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme would report to the Queen of Naboo upon arrival to let her know the situation and how they would handle Padme's security, as the three of them would make their way to Varikino. But while they were safely hidden, the galaxy would still be pulled closer to war. Windu would go to Dex and learn of Kamino, as he and Yoda would laugh about Obi-Wan somehow losing a planet, a constant in the Star Wars multiverse.
Lost a planet, Master Obi-Wan has. How embarrassing. How embarrassing.
But that was not the true puppet master working behind the scenes against our heroes. With the news that Obi-Wan was going with Anakin and Padme, Sidious would accelerate his plans as he would tell the Sand People that they should attack the Lars homestead to capture and kill Shmi Skywalker. This would cause Anakin's nightmares to get worse as he now needed to get to Tatooine. Obi-Wan knew this would be dangerous, but the seriousness of his Padawan unnerved him as he remembered the words his master had told him on Naboo all those years ago. He was still concerned for Padme's security, though, but Padme would add to him that whoever was coming after her would have a much harder time finding her on Tatooine than they would on her home world. They would shortly arrive on Tatooine, where they would track down the Lars homestead and learn that they were too late, that Shmi had already been taken and that she was assumed dead. That answer wouldn't be good enough for Anakin, though, as he would take a speeder and search for his mother. But this time, Obi-Wan would go with him. He feared what his Padawan would do in this state, and didn't want him to be alone when he got to the Sand People. The two would not speak as they made their way through the desert. The Force was darkening around Anakin, his attachment to his mother still there the same as it was when he was 9 years old, and when they found the Tusken Raiders' camp, Anakin wasted no time finding the exact hut his mother was in and cutting through it. Though they found Shmi, it was clear that she had been tortured and she was just barely clinging to life. Anakin quickly untied her as she began to wake up and recognize her son, who was now cradling her in his arms. She didn't have long, though, as all she could say was how proud she was of her son before becoming one with the Force. Anakin was shocked, in pain, and needed someone to blame. His anger grew towards his master. He should have taken his dreams more seriously. He should have trusted him. But when he looked up to Obi-Wan, expecting to be told off for his attachment, all he saw was the pained, understanding look of his master who loved him. Obi-Wan's heart broke for his student. He knew what he was going through. His master, who was the closest thing he had to a father, also had died in his arms. When Anakin saw this, he broke down in tears, the anger and hatred in his heart disappearing. Only pain was left from losing his mother as he realized he was wrong about his master. This was why he didn't want Anakin alone for this mission, because he cared about him, not wanting to hold him back. In this moment, he found himself grateful that his master was with him, that he wasn't alone in the worst moment of his life, and fearing what he would have done if he was. The two would return to the Lars homestead to bury Shmi and to pay their last respects. Anakin was inconsolable, though, and Obi-Wan didn't know how to deal with it. He would ask Padme to speak with him. He knew the risk, especially seeing how their bond had grown on Naboo and his own past with Duchess Satine of Mandalore, but Obi-Wan could think of nothing else. Their time on Naboo wasn't as romantic as it would have been without Obi-Wan, but he also couldn't be with them every second of the day. But as Padme attempted to comfort Anakin, R2 would alert the three of them that they had an urgent message. They would learn that upon arriving on Kamino, events had played out the same for Windu as he would learn of the clone army ordered by Master Sifo Dyas and meet Jango Fett, who was apparently hired by a man named Tyrannus. After failing to catch the bounty hunter, Windu would tail him as the two would arrive on Geonosis, where he would have to send a message to Obi-Wan to relay to the Council. After seeing Windu's message, Yoda would order Obi-Wan to keep Padme where she was, but after the call was over, she immediately wanted to go to Geonosis, to find a diplomatic solution so that the Republic wouldn't approve of an army. Obi-Wan would of course be against this, but she knew how to convince him to, that Master Windu was in danger and that it would take too long for the Jedi to get to him from Coruscant. Obi-Wan would look to Anakin, who would have life in his eyes for the first time since his mother had died. He had a feeling the two of them would leave him here if he didn't agree, so the three of them made their way to Geonosis with R2 and 3PO. Upon their arrival, Dooku would take a meeting with them as Padme attempted to negotiate the release of Master Windu. Dooku would try to use the situation to have Naboo join the Separatists and have Obi-Wan join him, as he would tell the three of them that the Republic was under the control of a Sith Lord. Both Obi-Wan and Anakin would react in disbelief. In Anakin's case, there was more anger, but Dooku would know he wouldn't get any of them to join him, and they would be taken prisoner, as Windu would congratulate them on a good job with their rescue. The battle would begin again with Ki-Adi-Mundi leading the Jedi into battle in the Colosseum, as they would quickly get overwhelmed, as the only difference in the battle is Samuel L. Jackson not being able to see himself because Windu didn't have his purple blade. Yoda would once again save them as the clone army was able to drive back the Separatists as Dooku would have to flee. As Master of the Order, Windu would take control of the clone army while Obi-Wan and Anakin chased after Dooku, with Anakin nearly leaving for Padme but still doing his duty. But Anakin was still in no mental state to be able to fight Dooku. He was jumpy, his mind clearly on Padme, and he attacked without thinking, only to swiftly be taken out of the fight by Dooku's lightning. He and Obi-Wan would take their turns with Dooku, only for them both to be defeated, Anakin losing an arm, and them only surviving because of Master Yoda, who would save them at the cost of letting Dooku escape. Begun, the Clone Wars has. With the battle over, Anakin would take Padme back to Naboo, now on his own as Obi-Wan wanted to show his trust in his now former Padawan. The two had not spent as much time together alone as they had before, but they would still get married, either because of the near-death experiences, or because there was less time for Anakin to be so painfully awkward. There wouldn't be any major changes in the Clone Wars. Anakin and Obi-Wan would still be made the faces of the Republic, as the two of them would be the most successful generals for them. Their bond would continue to grow as in training Ahsoka, Anakin would have a greater understanding of what his own master had been doing for him, and what he had done for him on Tatooine as Anakin had avoided taking his first steps down the path to the dark side. Though this is still the Republic, so they're still committing war crimes even as they claim to fight for the light. After saving the Chancellor over Coruscant and killing Count Dooku, Anakin would then learn that Padme was pregnant, and with it, the first visions of Padme dying in childbirth. He was nervous, unsure of what he could even do, but he knew he couldn't let these dreams become real. Not again. He wouldn't lose Padme how he had lost his mother. She tried to reassure him that she wouldn't die, that the medical droids on Coruscant would provide her any care she would need, that there was no danger, but these words had no effect on Anakin, so Padme brought up another idea. What if we go to Obi-Wan? Anakin's first instinct would be to say no, that they didn't need Obi-Wan. It would only get him expelled from the Jedi Order and Padme expelled from the Senate. They both wanted to end the war, and they couldn't do that if their marriage was revealed. But things weren't the same. Obi-Wan had seen Anakin at his worst. Anakin had never been able to tell anyone what happened that day, not even Padme or Palpatine. He was worried what he would have done. Part of him told himself that the Sand People would have deserved it, but he knew his mother wouldn't have wanted to see him do that. Obi-Wan's presence had calmed him at his worst, and he hadn't told the Jedi Council what happened. He wouldn't have been able to become a Jedi Knight if he had. So instead of going to Yoda with his premonitions, he waited until the briefing on the Outer Rim was over to speak with Obi-Wan. "Am I about to find out why he was so distracted during the meeting?" Obi-Wan asked his former Padawan. Anakin should have known that he couldn't get that past his master. In fact, he wondered if they really had any secrets at all, or if they were just pretending. He would tell his master that he was having premonitions again. Obi-Wan would ask if they were like the ones he had of his mother, and when Anakin said yes while not even being able to look him in the eye, he knew it was Padme. The time for pretending was over. Obi-Wan would ask him what happened in the premonition, if it was just flashes or if he had a full idea of the picture. He would warn him that acting on this premonition could lead to it happening, but there was something he seemed to be holding back. Obi-Wan may have known Anakin well enough to know that he and Padme were together, but Anakin knew Obi-Wan just as well. Obi-Wan would then let him know that the Chancellor wanted to see him, and didn't go through the usual channels to do it. Anakin didn't understand why his master was wary of the Chancellor, though, but with how honest they were being with each other, Obi-Wan would bring up how he has held onto power long after his term was up, and reminded him of what Dooku told them on Geonosis all those years ago. Anakin would not be receptive to the message, though, as he defended the Chancellor, but Obi-Wan didn't want to argue with Anakin if he was having similar premonitions. He just told him to be wary of those around the Chancellor, and that he would do everything in his power to keep Padme safe as long as Anakin would keep him involved and not act rashly. The purpose of Anakin's meeting with the Chancellor would be to let him know that he was appointing him his personal representative on the Jedi Council. Anakin would be overwhelmed, but he knew that the Council appointed its own members. Obi-Wan was on the Council. Whatever information he could need, he would get, but he knew he should be a master. After all he did for the Republic and the Jedi in the war, he knew he was more talented than most of them. The Council did invite Anakin to join their ranks, but did not make him a master, as Anakin felt they didn't trust him. And after the session, Obi-Wan was to tell Anakin of his new assignment, to spy on the Chancellor. Obi-Wan didn't want to give him this assignment, but Yoda and Windu had decided it had to be done, and Obi-Wan would be the only one who could convince Anakin. But this time Obi-Wan knew of his premonitions and said that he would have to work with Anakin on this. If he was the only one who could convince him, then Anakin would report to him. And while Yoda and Windu didn't like the idea of taking their two best generals out of the Outer Rim for a time, they did agree. The threat around the Chancellor was too great to do anything else. This would quickly be put to the test when Anakin reported that the Chancellor had intelligence on the location of General Grievous. He also recommended that Anakin be the one to track him down, which the Council didn't take well. Ki-Adi-Mundi would suggest that Obi-Wan go instead, but Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Windu would share a look, knowing that Obi-Wan would refuse if the Grand Master or Master of the Order said nothing. Windu would say that he would go to track down Grievous, as that would mean that Yoda would have to stay at the temple, in spite of his good relations with the Wookiees, as Ki-Adi-Mundi would break down in tears, saying,
"Won't somebody please think of the droid attack on the Wookiees?"
Anakin would be confused by these events. His former master had the most experience fighting Grievous, so if Anakin wasn't going to go, then Obi-Wan would make the next most sense. He would then seek out his master about what had just happened. Obi-Wan would make sure they were alone before telling Anakin the reason he wasn't going after Grievous was because of Anakin's mission, that even though he trusted Anakin with his life, that he didn't want him to be alone right now, especially if the nightmares about Padme were continuing. Anakin would then tell him that he had a way to save Padme that Palpatine had told him. Of course, Obi-Wan would follow up with what was it, and upon hearing it, would become more worried. Despite this, Anakin wanted to know more of this Darth Plagueis and wouldn't let Padme die. Obi-Wan would agree to search the secret archives for this master of the Sith, fearing what Anakin would do to save Padme, but only if Anakin continued to tell him everything Palpatine was saying to him, especially if he potentially knew Sith tales that the Jedi didn't. Anakin knew deep down that his master was right, that the Sith may very well be around Palpatine, but he refused to let Padme die. He couldn't live without her, but if Obi-Wan was on his side, then he would continue to work with him. Obi-Wan would then go to Yoda, and the two of them would search the archives for this Darth Plagueis. They knew Sidious was the one they were looking for, so there was hope that Plagueis could have been a Sith legend, one that could have existed before the 1,000 generations of peace in the Republic. But there was nothing there. No mention of Plagueis. Whoever this Dark Lord was, he had existed in the shadows, perhaps for 1,000 years or even longer. But if Sidious was the one who they were looking for, then maybe Sidious was the apprentice, or had been his apprentice. But news of the Clone Wars would interrupt them before they could learn more of this Plagueis. Windu had destroyed General Grievous, and now Anakin would be telling Palpatine to see if he would give up his emergency powers, and if not, he would take the Jedi to a dark place. Palpatine would then reveal himself to Anakin, that he had the power to save his wife from certain death, but Anakin was conflicted. Palpatine had been on both sides of the war. He was extremely powerful, a threat with no equal. This was what Anakin was destined to do, but all he wanted was a life with Padme. He would immediately tell this to Yoda and Obi-Wan back at the Jedi Temple, that Palpatine was the Sith Lord they had been looking for, as shock and worry would cover their faces, their worst fears realized. Yoda's instinct would be to go after the Dark Lord alone, as Anakin would say he would need help if they were going to arrest him. Yoda sat deep in thought as he wondered how to handle this. His time with the Wills of the Force made him think that the trap had been sprung, yet now there was hope, a sliver of light. Perhaps not all was lost, but action would have to be taken quickly and carefully. He sensed Anakin's conflict and didn't want to bring him, but Obi-Wan stood up for him. He was the chosen one. It was his destiny to destroy the Sith. There was a vergence in the Force, and Anakin was it. To not trust him would be to doom them. Yoda knew in his heart that Skywalker was the key to everything. The Jedi, the Sith, the war, it all led to this, and Skywalker would be the one to end the conflict, one way or the other. The three Jedi would be joined by Kit Fisto, Agen Kolar, and Saesee Tiin as they would go to arrest Sidious. When they reached the chambers, he knew there was no need to act as if Anakin hadn't told them everything. The Jedi were showing faith in him, and Skywalker seemed to be open to their messaging, but if he would not join willingly, then Sidious would force him to. There was no other way. Sidious quickly attacked Kolar and Tiin with blinding speed, killing them both before turning his blade to Fisto, who was only able to defend him for a couple of strikes, but now Anakin saw him for what he was, a murderer. He couldn't trust him, especially as he turned his blade to Obi-Wan, who only just managed to defend himself. Yoda and Anakin would then attack as Sidious pulled out a second blade, keeping them both on the defensive while forcing Obi-Wan into more offensive striking. But Sidious could not keep this up forever. He had to isolate the Jedi so he could turn Anakin. So he blasted Obi-Wan with Force lightning faster than even Yoda could react as he was knocked back into the wall, seemingly unconscious. He then turned to Yoda and blasted him, but the Grand Master was able to absorb it. He pushed harder, knowing that this was his opportunity.
I have the power to save the one you love!
Anakin was blinded by the display in front of him, and frozen by Palpatine's mention of Padme, now not knowing what side he was on. There was then a blast as neither could hold the power between them, sending them both across the room as Palpatine lay there, begging for his life at his weakest and frailest as Yoda approached him cautiously. He sounded so pathetic. Anakin almost pitied him, but he needed him, or more his knowledge of how to save Padme. If this was what he was, then he was no threat to Anakin, as he no longer feared the weak old man begging for his life, saying he can save Padme, but only if Anakin saved him. "Know that he does not," Yoda would say. He would tell Anakin that he could be Plagueis' apprentice, that the story was only to get him to join him, and that he believed he knew how to live beyond death. But before he could continue, Palpatine would summon a lightsaber and drive it through the Grand Master's chest, as Yoda looked down in shock, and then back to Anakin one last time as he faded into nothing, truly becoming one with the Force. Both Palpatine and Anakin would be unsure of how to react. The Grand Master had seemingly disappeared, but he was dead. Palpatine would then say, "The Jedi have tried to overthrow me. Will you join me in stopping their coup, or will you die with them?" Anakin felt so many things at once: fear, grief, anger, even hatred. Hatred for everything the galaxy had become, that Palpatine had turned it into. He hated Palpatine. He had to be the one who was behind the threat to Padme too, and if Yoda could live beyond death, then Anakin wouldn't need the dark side to save her. With that thought, he turned his blade to Palpatine, and there was nothing more to it. He was a Jedi, and now Sidious knew that he had to die. There would be others, anyway, who could serve him. But the fight was much harder than Sidious could have anticipated. Anakin's strength in the Force seemed to be growing by the second. He was using his hatred in this fight, not just his fear and anger like with Dooku, a burning, white-hot hatred for Palpatine that he began to worry he was no match for. He tried to short-circuit Anakin's mechanical hand, but nothing could stop him now. He was fighting for the galaxy, for the Jedi, for Padme, and with her in his mind, he grabbed the Dark Lord, freezing him in midair as Sidious was helpless to do anything, as Anakin raised his blade, ready to strike him down. But a different blue blade pierced his chest. Obi-Wan had survived and killed Sidious, who would fall to the floor with an unceremonious thud. The Dark Lord of the Sith lived no more. Anakin fell to the floor, the darkness inside him dissipating at the look of his master who prevented him from killing and giving in to the dark side. Again. The two shared a look as they felt so many things: grief, pain, joy. The darkness was not just fading from Anakin, but from the galaxy as a whole, as the Sith were destroyed. In the aftermath, the Jedi would present evidence that Palpatine was the Sith Lord operating both sides of the war, as Bail Organa would succeed him as Chancellor, removing all emergency powers and giving the power back to the Senate, to democracy. Padme would give a healthy birth on Coruscant to Jyn and Leia Skywalker as she would resign from the Senate, and Anakin would leave the Jedi Order, having fulfilled his destiny. Obi-Wan would become the Grand Master of the Jedi Order as Yoda and Qui-Gon communed with him, as the Jedi would begin to separate themselves from the Republic, especially when its Grand Master wasn't brave enough for politics. The galaxy would know peace as the Clone Wars and the War of the Jedi and Sith were over. At least for now. And that is our story for today. I know some of you were probably expecting Anakin to still turn to the dark side. If this were real life, I would agree it would probably manifest more and he'd probably have some kind of blow up before he actually turns to the dark side in the canon, but I was kind of just going with that quote Yoda has in Empire about how once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, and in this story, Anakin doesn't start down the dark path the same way, but let me know down in the comments if you agree that Anakin would have stayed in the light, or if you still think he would have turned to the dark after this, and let me know if there are any other Star Wars what-ifs you guys would like to see. I'd love to tell that story to you. Probably also going to have a Harry Potter what-if coming out pretty soon if anybody's interested in that. But if you stuck around this long, first off, thank you. I know this is a long video, but if you stuck around this long, you've probably enjoyed it a little bit. So please drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.